Welcome, dear traveler. Before we begin tonight's tale, remember to subscribe to the channel and tap the bell if you'd like to join more quiet journeys across the stars. This helps the story reach those who need a gentle escape. Now, settle. In tonight, you'll follow the footsteps of a Jedi long forgotten by the galaxy. Master Cylon once fought in the Great Wars, but now wanders alone, guided only by echoes in the Force. When a mysterious signal interrupts her silent exile, she follows it to the lost world of Ilaros, a place erased from the archives and possibly the last cradle of light in the Outer Rim. The story begins with silence and a question. What do you do when the Force calls you back from the edge of oblivion? The stars hummed softly beyond the viewport, scattered like quiet thoughts across the endless dark, and within the hollow chamber of the meditation room aboard the Kestrel Dawn, Jedi Master Cylon sat unmoving, her robes draped in stillness as starlight flickered across her closed eyelids. She had not spoken aloud in days, not since the last moonless jump, and even now, words felt distant, like relics from a life she no longer wore. The Force surrounded her, not in brilliance or command, but in silence, the deep hum beneath. Reality, like the slow exhale of a sleeping world, then like a ripple across water too still, it came. A tone, barely a vibration at first, threading through the empty space like the cry of a creature long extinct. Her eyes did not open. Instead, her senses leaned into it, the way one listens to the shift of wind before a storm. It wasn't just a sound. It was a memory coded deep, a signature, Jedi encryption, ancient and near forgotten, buried protocols from the earliest days of the Clone Wars. And yet it was active, alive. The signal wasn't directed to anyone in particular, no plea for help, no coordinates of evacuation. It was a whisper, repeating slowly, hidden in the silence between star waves, pulsing like a heartbeat through the darkness. Cylon rose with grace born of years unmeasured, her bare feet touching the cold durasteel as she moved to the small console near her sleeping mat. Fingers gliding over symbols etched in her own hand, custom navigation runes from when she had first chosen exile. And there it was, the signal, broadcasting from a region not listed on any star chart updated in the last decade. The name blinked in faded glyphs, almost hesitant to show itself. Ilaros, a name she hadn't heard. Since the Temple, a planet struck from the Republic records before the war even ended. Too remote, too wild, too uncertain to defend when the worlds began to fall. She remembered only one thing from her lessons about it. Ilaros hides what the Force is not, ready to reveal. And now, after all these years of quiet, of self-imposed wandering through the forgotten corners of the galaxy, the Force called her back, not with visions, not with fire or urgency, but with a sound softer than sleep. She didn't prepare in the way a warrior might. No battle readiness, no strategy, only a cloak, the holocron fragments she still carried, and her lightsaber, long dormant, hidden inside the folds of a satchel that smelled faintly of cinder tree, oil and age. The Kestrel Dawn obeyed her touch with a sigh, shifting its trajectory through hyperspace toward the quiet wound in the sky that the signal pulsed from. Stars blurred into lines, and time folded gently, as if the universe itself understood this was not a mission, it was a return. Hours passed, or perhaps only minutes, in the stillness of the cockpit as the galaxy streamed around her, and in that time, Cylon sat again, this time not in meditation, but in remembrance. She thought of her old master, whose voice had not reached her dreams in years, of the younglings she once trained, now ashes in the wind of past wars, of Coruscant, burning quietly beneath Republic flags that no longer meant anything. And most of all, she thought of the promise she once made, that if ever the Force fell silent, she would become its listener. If ever its light dimmed, she would carry the ember. And now that ember flickered again, not in the heart of the galaxy, but in some forgotten place where the Force still dreamed. The moment hyperspace peeled back into reality, her breath caught, not in fear, but in awe. Ilaros hung in space like a dying flame, its surface bathed in rust-red and dusky orange, clouded with mist that curled like sleeping breath around its equator. No satellites, no beacons, no orbiting structures, only silence, ancient and full. The kestrel descended through soft winds that did not resist her, and the ship landed on a clearing of dark stone, nestled between forests that shimmered with colors she could not name. She stepped out into air that tasted of memory, warm and clean, like the space between pages of an old book. Beneath her boots, the stone vibrated faintly, as if echoing with forgotten footsteps. The signal was gone now, but she knew. It had only needed to guide her here. The rest would unfold as the Force intended. She reached into her cloak not for her weapon, but for a small pendant made of green crystal once gifted to her by a Padawan whose name she would never speak again. She pressed it to the stone and closed her eyes. "I'm here," she whispered, and the wind answered, lending on Ilaros. The stone beneath Silent's feet hummed like the memory of a song, soft and circular, not a melody exactly, but a rhythm the body noticed before the mind. The red forest loomed before her like a breathing wall, its trunks impossibly tall and smooth, the bark glinting like damp glass in the filtered light. And above it all, the skies of Ilaros glowed amber with a sun too old to burn harshly. Clouds curled like whisper trails across the high air, and something deep in the world sighed with every breeze, as if the planet itself remembered her arrival. Silent took slow steps toward the tree line, her cloak brushing against moss that shimmered faintly with bioluminescent dust, glowing blue and green as her shadow passed, vines twisted upward like hands reaching for forgotten warmth, and the trees themselves made no sound, as though they were listening. It was quiet here, but not empty. She could feel life in layers, the hum of roots far below, the movement of fur and claw just beyond sight, and something deeper, something that watched not with eyes, but with presence. The Force here was not sharp or radiant. It was ancient and thick, like honey warmed by time, and it clung to her skin with a weight both comforting and mournful. She passed between the trees and let them surround her, welcoming the feeling of being swallowed by the forest, not in danger but in peace. The air cooled as she moved, and soon the light dimmed under the canopy, where leaves the size of sails folded gently above, and soft spores drifted like stardust in every sunbeam that broke through. Her boots made no sound against the pathless ground, yet she walked with intention, guided not by map or memory, but by the steady pulse in her chest where the Force touched her like a hand. Something had called her, not just the signal, not just the mystery, but something older buried beneath centuries of silence. The deeper she walked, the more she noticed the way the forest curved, subtly but clearly, like it had grown around something, protecting it, guarding it. And then she saw it, A clearing not marked by stone or ruin, but by stillness. The trees ended abruptly in a perfect circle, and in its center stood a structure. Not a temple, not a ruin, but something in between. A formation of stone ribs, curving out of the ground like the bones of a great beast, tall and grey and softened by moss, arching inward toward a shallow depression at the center. She stepped into the circle and felt the temperature shift, cooler and more focused, as if the air itself became aware of her. Here, the force was strongest, not loud or demanding, but full, like the center of a dream. Kneeling, she ran, her fingers over the surface of one of the stones, feeling the ridges, the carvings. They were not letters, not symbols from any language she knew, but more like emotional impressions carved into the stone, echoes of feeling, fear, hope, sorrow, clarity, all pressed into the surface by hands that no longer existed. She closed her eyes and reached out with her mind, her breath slowing, her thoughts softening. The force met her not as a vision, but as a warmth spreading through her ribs, and then a voice, soft as dusk. "You returned." It wasn't hers, and yet it came from inside. She didn't speak back, not with words, but with acceptance. She was here, and whatever remained of Ilaros knew her. Images flickered through her senses, not in sequence, but in emotion. Children laughing near these same stones, lightsabers, humming beneath a pale sky, robes of cream and copper, hands lifted in peace, not war. And then ash, fire that never burned but erased, shadows that fell without form and silence, always silence. She opened her eyes slowly and stood, the moss clinging faintly to her knees, and looked beyond the ribstones toward a path newly visible at the edge of the clearing, a descent carved into the earth, narrow and lined with roots hidden until now, as if her presence had granted passage. The way forward led down. She lit no torch, no lamp. Her eyes adjusted to the shifting glow of lichen that pulsed softly along the walls as she descended, spiraling deeper, the stones smooth beneath her fingers, as if worn by centuries of soft steps. The deeper she went, the more the air thickened with memory, and the more her own past rose to meet her, faces she had let go, decisions she had buried, the silence of battles won at too great a cost. She walked through them all, not resisting, simply witnessing, until at last the passage opened into a chamber. It was round, domed, and at its center stood a single pedestal of white stone, no taller than her knee, upon which rested a mask carved from smooth wood, ringed in silver, featureless except for a single closed eye etched in the forehead. She did not touch it. She knelt before it, sensing. It was not an object of power, but of memory, a relic of a Jedi who had once chosen to remain behind, to stay when others fled, a guardian not of knowledge, but of forgetting. And suddenly she understood. Ilaros was not lost by accident. It had been hidden willingly, a place where a handful of Jedi had once sought to remove themselves from war, to protect a version of the Order that could not survive in battle. And this place, this temple of stone and silence, was their legacy, their truth, and now she had found it. But was she meant to preserve it or become it? The temple with no name. The chamber remained still as silence stood, her breath moving slowly like fog through the hush. And though no words echoed off the stone, the very air carried the weight of voices, hundreds, perhaps thousands, whose names had long since vanished. their presences lingering like shadows that had chosen to stay. The mask on the pedestal seemed to pulse gently in the faint light, not alive, not sentient, but aware in a way that spoke of devotion. This was no burial site, no ruin of defeat. It was a sanctuary, a refuge formed from quiet conviction, built not with weapons or orders, but with stillness. Silence circled the room with reverence, letting her fingers trail along the curved wall where faint impressions had been carved. Not letters, not logograms, but paths of touch, as though those who came before her had left their memories by hand, pressing sorrow and peace and solitude into the surface like prayers. She moved without sound, her mind opening wider, the force flowing through her with a clarity she had not known since before the fall. And within that current, she felt them, the other Jedi who had once walked this place. Not ghosts, not spirits trapped in time, but remnants, echoes preserved by the world itself, waiting for someone to remember not their names, but their choice. They had been the quiet ones, the disappeared, not hunted, not exiled, but those who chose a third path when the Republic fractured and the temple burned. Sylens knelt once more, this time not in front of the mask, but beside it, placing her hand on the cold floor and letting her awareness sink deep into the stone. The force responded like a long-held breath finally released, and with it came a vision, not sharp or bright, but gentle, like a memory returned through the touch of a dream. She stood again, in another time, within this same chamber, only, now filled with low golden light from hanging lanterns of woven root. There were others here, 3, perhaps 4, wearing robes of soft brown and grey, their hoods low, their sabers unlit. One stood at the center, hands resting on the same pedestal, voice calm and deliberate. "We do not flee," he had said, and his words rippled outward as though repeated by the very walls. "We wait, we remember, we guard what must one day return." And then they bowed, not to the speaker, not to a code, but to each other. And in that gesture was their purpose. Not resistance, not survival, but continuity. The vision faded like dusk slipping into night, and Sylens' eyes opened slowly to the silence once more. She did not feel alone. She did not feel watched. She felt accepted. She had come seeking an answer to the signal, but what she had found was deeper than a summons. It was an inheritance. And yet the question remained, why now? Why her? The mask still waited, its single eye unblinking, the wood warm with age. She reached toward it, not to take it, but to touch it. And as her skin met its surface, another wave of the force surged through her, this time colder, threaded with tension. Danger, not here, not within the temple, but above, in orbit. Something had arrived, something searching, and it had not yet found her. She stood with practiced stillness, letting the wave pass, drawing her cloak tighter as she turned toward the passage she had entered through. But before she left, she bowed, slow and low, to the pedestal and the memory it held. She would return, but not yet. The world above had shifted. Ilaros was not hidden anymore, and she was no longer its only guardian. The force that sleeps. The forest greeted her again with the hush of deep time, its crimson canopy filtering the light into warm, flickering tones that painted the air like liquid dusk. And as Sylens emerged from the stone-ribbed temple, the world felt different. Not darker, not hostile, but alert, as though Ilaros had awakened from a long, slow dream. She moved carefully through the undergrowth, every motion considered, listening to the small shifts of life around her, the scrape of insect wings against bark, the distant chirr of dusk birds settling in mossy hollows, the creak of tree limbs, exhaling with the change of light, and above it all, far above the trees and clouds, she could still sense the presence, faint and cold, like the touch of metal through fabric. Something orbiting, something searching, but it had not descended. Yet and so she walked on, drawn by another pull, not of danger but of connection. It came like a thread in the force, soft and irregular, as though tangled in confusion and instinct, and it led her through shallow glades and narrow root tunnels until the forest opened once more into a sun-dappled hollow where water whispered. Over smooth stone and pale flowers swayed without wind, and there, curled between two tree roots, was a child, small, still, face smudged with moss and ash, eyes closed in the soft rhythm of sleep. But Silen felt the truth before she even stepped closer. The child pulsed with the force, not in flashes or torrents, but in a steady warmth, deep and centered, untrained, untouched. The kind of natural resonance she had only ever sensed in the earliest days at the temple, when a youngling first held a stone and made it float without understanding why. She knelt at a distance, not to disturb, only to observe, and as she watched, the child stirred, not startled but aware, head tilting slightly, eyes fluttering open with the same calm that lived in the trees. They locked eyes, no fear, no question, only recognition, as though they had dreamed of one another before this moment. "You heard it too," the child said, voice thin but certain, and Silen nodded, not speaking yet, letting the silence between them do the listening. "It sings," the child added, placing a hand against the earth, palm flat, eyes half closed. "Underneath everything. Even when I sleep, it sings." Silen stepped closer now, gently lowering herself to sit beside the child, careful not to disturb the rhythm of the moment. She reached into her satchel and produced a small, round object, an old meditation stone, etched with spirals and smooth from years of use. She placed it on the ground between them. The child reached out without hesitation, fingers brushing the surface, and in that instant Silen felt it, the crystal resonance, the force blooming not in power, but in balance. There was something pure in the child's presence, something untouched by doctrine, unspoiled by war, and it humbled her. For all her years of study and silence, she had forgotten the simple truth. The Force was not a weapon, not a legacy, not even a path. It was life, unfiltered and ever-present. "Ilaros keeps me safe," the child murmured, looking up at the trees. "When the others came, it hid me. The forest closed, and the wind stopped, and I was gone. Even the metal ones couldn't find me." Silen listened, understanding slowly forming around the shape of the child's words. Whoever had arrived before her, perhaps scavengers, perhaps worse, had been turned away by the planet itself, not through violence, but through subtle resistance, a bending of nature that only the Force could orchestrate. She placed a hand gently on the child's shoulder, and the two sat in stillness, the birds returning now, the hush lifting slightly. This child was not merely sensitive, they were connected, rooted in Ilaros like the trees and the world had chosen to protect them. And now, so would she. For in this small, curious soul lived something long thought lost, not power, but impossibility. And as the sky above shifted once more, a faint hum in the air signaling movement in orbit, Cylon knew their time of quiet would not last. The Force was awakening here, slowly, tenderly, and soon it would be noticed. The Inquisitor's footsteps. The wind on Ilaros changed without warning, not louder, not colder, but charged, as though the air itself had begun to listen for footsteps that had not yet touched the soil, and Cylon felt it ripple through the canopy even before the birds grew still, even before the child beside her turned their face upward toward the rust-colored sky. They both knew, without speaking, that something had arrived. Not a scout, not a machine. Something worse. Cylon rose with quiet precision, her hand brushing the child's shoulder in a silent gesture of reassurance, and together they moved, slowly, without panic, through the folds of the forest, guided not by sight or sound, but by instinct, weaving between trees that seemed to part gently for them, trunks leaning as if to shield them from view. They crossed a shallow ravine, veiled in mist, and ducked beneath thick roots where the moss clung damp and fragrant, the child leading now, their bare feet sure on the uneven ground, as though the forest itself whispered paths into their ears. It wasn't until they reached the edge of a ridge, high above a long clearing lined with pale stones, that they saw the shape descending. A dark vessel, crescent-shaped, too sleek for freight, too silent for diplomacy, its hull reflecting no light as it settled into the clearing like a spider lowering itself onto its web. Cylon knelt, drawing the child down beside her, and together they watched the ramp extend with a hiss of vented pressure. The figure that emerged was tall, cloaked in robes of matte black, shoulders angular, movements deliberate. The Force, bent around them not with depth, but with weight, heavy and cold, like metal sunk deep into a well. An Inquisitor. But not like those she had known in the early years of the Purge. This one moved not with arrogance, but with hunger, like someone searching for something they had no name for. Their helmet bore no insignia, no mouthpiece, only a narrow horizontal slit of crimson light where the eyes should have been. They paused at the base of the ramp, gloved fingers splaying slightly as if feeling the air, and Cylon felt the probe. A wave of energy cast outward like a fisherman's net, wide and unfocused, a mind reaching without finesse. But the forest held its breath, the trees drawing in their presence, the life around her dulling itself like a candle shielding its flame. The child pressed against Cylon's side and whispered without sound, "The roots are hiding us." And it was true. The Force here was not resisting, it was concealing, wrapping them in layers of stillness deeper than silence. The Inquisitor moved slowly into the clearing, pausing at each stone, touching one with the tips of their fingers, and Cylon saw it then. The slight tremor in the arm, the head tilt not of control, but of frustration. This one was not whole. The dark side pulsed around them but dimly, like a fire burned too long, fueled more by need than fury. Whoever they were, they had not come as a hunter, but as someone seeking something lost. Cylon felt no hate, only absence, and that was more dangerous. The Inquisitor turned toward the forest's edge, closer now, but not close enough to see. They knelt, placing one bare hand to the soil, and something in the earth rejected them, a faint shudder, almost imperceptible, as though Ilaros itself did not want them here. The figure stood again, slower this time, looking skyward, as if uncertain, And then, without ceremony, they spoke, a voice modulated and low, but not mechanical, the sound of someone unused to speech. "I know you're here," they said, but not with confidence. And Cylon, hidden behind the crest of the ridge, remained still. She could have answered. She could have stepped forth and drawn her blade for the first time in years. But she did not, because something deeper stirred within her, a question that had no shape yet. The Inquisitor stood for a long time beneath the twilight, their presence fading slightly with every moment, not retreating, but weakening, as though the planet itself refused to hold them. And finally, they returned to their ship. Not in rage, not in defeat, but with a weariness that did not match their armor. The vessel rose slowly, leaving no scorch marks on the stones, and vanished into the upper layers of cloud without a word. The forest exhaled, birds returned, distant at first. The tension eased from the branches, and Cylon turned to the child, who watched her, not with fear, but with knowing. "He'll come back," the child said softly, and Cylon nodded. "Yes, but he'll find something different next time." And together they stood in the gathering night, the roots and leaves of Ilaros cradling them like hands in prayer. One light remains. Dawn came slowly on Ilaros, not in a rush of brightness, but in soft gold-tinted mist that wrapped itself around the high branches and kissed the moss with warmth so gentle it felt like memory. And Cylon stood at the edge of the clearing, her cloak catching the first threads of light as she looked skyward, not searching for ships but listening for silence. And it was still there, the quiet, the kind that lingered after a storm had passed, the kind that was not empty, but sacred. The child sat nearby, drawing spirals in the earth with a twig, humming low and tuneless under their breath, and the world around them had returned to stillness, not out of fear, but balance. The Inquisitor had not returned, not yet, and Cylon did not know if he would, or what shape he might wear when he did, but that no longer mattered. She had come here as a question, a relic of a broken order, drifting through the forgotten lanes of the galaxy in search of meaning, of purpose, of place. And now, standing beneath a sky that did not judge her, surrounded by roots older than war and soil that had refused to remember death, she understood. The Jedi were not dead. They had not vanished. They had changed. And here, in the red-forested hush of Ilaros, the change was not a defeat, it was a beginning. She did not send messages back to any alliance, did not activate the beacon hidden in her satchel, did not call for others to come. Some places must be kept in silence. Some lights are meant to burn small, slow, unseen. She spent days moving through the temple once more, restoring what little needed tending, clearing the vines from the hollow stair, whispering the names of Jedi she remembered into the walls, not to awaken ghosts, but to let their presence breathe again. The child followed sometimes, sometimes not, their own rhythm guided by something deeper than instruction, their questions soft, their laughter rare but bright. They learned through watching, through touching, through simply being. And Cylon, taught without teaching, giving only what was needed, never more, letting the Force itself shape what was to come. And when she sat in meditation again, it was not in the hollow of a ship or the shell of regret. It was beneath branches that moved like breath, beside a pool where leaves drifted like thoughts, and she did not close herself off from the galaxy anymore. She felt it all, The chaos, the sorrow, the sharpness of conflict, but also the quiet joys, the rebirths, the tiny acts of courage that sparked in corners unseen. And she held it gently, without need to control, only to witness, for that was her path now. Not to lead, not to vanish, but to be, to remain. And so the galaxy turned and stars bloomed, and Ilaros slept on, wrapped in its veil of trees. And time, its secret guarded not by walls or weapons, but by one small child and one quiet Jedi, who no longer needed to be remembered, because some lights do not burn to be seen. They burn to warm the dark. And though her name would fade from history, though no archive would mark her return, somewhere far from the noise of empires and rebellion, one light remained. Thank you for joining this quiet journey across the stars. If this story brought you peace, please consider subscribing and exploring the rest of the playlist. Until next time, may your sleep be deep and your dreams full of light.